And good morning, everybody. We're live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of fantastic food safety, food quality, putting awesome food on the table for the country and everybody around the world. And if nobody says it out there, Austin and me, Bryan Armentrout, are going to say thanks a lot. We really appreciate all you do, because a lot of times in food safety, part of the challenge of our work is that if we do it well, unfortunately, nobody notices, but we do. So thank you very much for what you do. So please pull up a chair and join us for an hour. We appreciate the investment of time that you're taking to grow your knowledge and your base. We're all better for it. So thanks for doing that. If you're new, this is the Food Safety Chat. And every week, we get together with a food safety expert and we talk about all things food safety. My name is Bryan Armentrout, and every week I bring on a fantastic guest. And this week I'm very happy. You're going to love it. Every time we have Austin on, it's always a great show. So we have Austin Welch of Sage Media on today. Austin, how you doing today?
Doing good, man. Doing good. Getting excited for the fall.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. So May and September, my favorite times of year, especially here in Colorado. And Austin and I are both in Colorado, and I'm in the Loveland area where we had a decent amount of rain yesterday, which is awesome. It's been a very atypical summer here, I think, as far as the weather. Normally this time of year, come August or so, your grass is struggling, your yard looks like crap. You're trying to water it, and then water restrictions are hitting, and they're talking about droughts on the news, and you're like, and so it's always a massive challenge for sure. So we have Allie joining us. Claire, good to see you. Cheryl, nice to see you as well. Cara, good to see you. It's really cool having the people who come here and join us every week. We're really honored and happy to have you here. So we really appreciate you. So thank you very much. So with that, oh my goodness, we have a lot to cover on the show again. And Austin has been super busy. If you haven't noticed on LinkedIn, if you're not connected to Austin on LinkedIn, you need to do that. He's been putting out little videos on different activities that he's been working on behind the scenes. And we're going to, here at the end of the chat, give some more details on what he's been up to and how you can, learn from his experience and take and apply what he's teaching into your businesses. And I think what he's doing in these areas is really, really important, because we all know that just trying to sit people down in front of a PowerPoint in a production facility and teach them something doesn't work, right? And behind that, there's a whole lot of psychology and how these things work, and we're going to get a tiny little bit into that today. And Austin's going to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and give you a peek on what he's been up to. But before we do that, guys, please join us for a ceremonial drink. Cheers, everyone. And to get started here, Austin's going to groan, but we're going to do this. So Austin, how can you tell if you're hearing a dad joke from someone?
I don't know how.
Well, it's apparent.
All this and more, only on the Friday Food Safety Chat.
Oh my goodness. Who let me out? I don't know. So with that, one of the things, Austin,
laughing at your own joke.
It's a challenge now to transition, is it? It's like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? So we all know that in a production company, right, you're making food, you're making awesome coffee, half and half, these type of things, that corporate's nice, right? And things need to happen at corporate. So you have the procurement people and legal and QA people and sales and marketing, all these guys. But the rubber really hits the road in the manufacturing plant. And that's where the action is. That's where everything goes right, or conversely, everything goes wrong. And unfortunately, a lot of times, if things are going wrong in the plant, you don't find out until after the fact, right? Because they're making product and it's going out the door. And maybe a month later, depending on the shelf life of your product, consumers start seeing what you're making and they start going, what the heck is going on, right? And all of a sudden, complaints start going up and things starts going on. And then everything starts hitting the fan, and nobody likes that. And when it happens, a lot of times the quality assurance, the food safety folks, we're sent out then to investigate, to figure out what the heck is going on. And what I have found in my career then is really, Austin, the eyes and ears of what's happening in that production facility are on the floor, right? So you got the plant, But really, if you want to find out what's going on, you need to go out on the floor. That's where the eyes and ears are. That's where you learn about what's going on and how things are happening. And a lot of times we will put forth slogans and say, hey guys, if you see something that's not right, you need to let us know. And what does that mean? And so a lot of times you see sayings like, if you see something, say, if you see something, say something, and these type of things. And that's kind of really vague and arbitrary. And it almost sounds a little big brotherish, right? It's like, hey, narc on your friends if you see something. Hey, who's going to do that? But really, it kind of leads into our conversation for today is when we're asking people to do that, when should people speak up? What are some examples around that?
Yeah. I mean, and there's so many different examples of when people should speak up. This is a topic I got into years and years ago before I even was in the food industry. And I was designing all different types of training programs. And I started getting into designing some anti-harassment programs. And that was kind of like where my research started on this, was this a key way to prevent harassment from happening is that when people see something inappropriate happen, then they say something. So that's where the concept of bystander intervention comes from. And then moving into the food industry, a lot of the research directly translates into the food industry as well. And so, when we're, obviously within the workplace, there's anti-harassment issues where people should speak up, but then you've got plant safety, right? And there's a lot of interesting research on where they've kind of done post-mortem on accidents and found out that, well, people saw this coming, this particular accident coming. They just didn't say anything about it. And the same thing with food recalls. We see a lot that with a food recall that in the post-mortem that there was people who knew that there was something wrong, but they didn't say anything about it for a range of different reasons. And figuring out what those reasons are is what's really interesting to me. Diving into those reasons and really figuring out a lot of the psychological and sociological reasons as to what is keeping people from doing that. Because most companies do have that see something, say something poster hanging up, or it's mentioned randomly in meetings. But as I talk to different people really around the country or around the world, I hear the same thing, which is that we tell them to do that, but they're not. Right. And then they're scratching their heads trying to figure out, well, why, if we tell them to do something, they know, they have this information, why aren't they utilizing it? And that's where it gets really interesting, is figuring out that why.
Yeah, you reminded me, I remember a story, and I use this in media training and things like this in my past, is sometimes when there's a food safety crisis, if it's a big deal, they'll send a news truck or something to a production facility and camp outside. And in this particular instance, the local news station did that. And the workers were coming off of their shift and going out the door and going to their cars, and they were jumping people essentially, right, and sticking a mic in their face and saying, hey, we hear there's something going on in this plant. What's going on? And I remember one worker in particular was like, oh my God, yes, there's all kinds of stuff going on. We've been talking about this forever. And I told I told him this was going to happen and these type of things. And I'm just watching this going, oh my goodness, right? It's kind of that rumor mill. Was it true or not? Probably not. But I can guarantee that leadership in that company, when they saw that, all went like this. Right? All of their hard work and everything down the drain. Right? And what's interesting on this as well, Austin, is that this kind of covers all kinds of behavior, right? And cracking this code in the plant. Because as you had mentioned, right, there's not only food safety issues, there's worker safety where somebody's driving around like an idiot on a forklift. There are GMP issues where, you're in a line with other people and the guy in front of you just keeps walking and doesn't wash his hands. There are quality issues, right, where somebody's like, nah, it's fine, right on the line, and they're making decisions on the fly. Even things that are more serious, biosecurity, where there's somebody who even works in the facility who's in an area of the plant that they shouldn't be. And they're dinking around in the chemical storage area, and somebody sees them, and they don't say anything.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
have,
it applies to so many different areas, and
yeah.
and you brought up the GMPs, and this is the GMP is an area that I've been developing further interest in, because I've really focused on food safety culture for the past 5-6 years. But one of the things that I keep seeing is a restriction to people developing food safety culture is that they come back and they say, well, our GMPs aren't strong enough. Like we got to get the foundation set before we work on this concept of food safety culture.
Yeah.
And so like GMPs has been a topic of conversation that seems to keep coming up over and over again. And I'm always kind of, I don't know why, but I'm always surprised, because it's these larger companies that I figure like, surely that is done. That's in place. But that it seems to be a constant battle.
Oh, 100%. And that's a good example. And when I post on locals, warning letters, for example, FDA always breaks it down to 2 categories, right? So your controls relative to your GMPs under 117, and then any type of food safety issues you may have, right? So you didn't implement a proper food safety plan or things like this. But inevitably on those 43s, when FDA is writing those up, one of the first things that they'll list out in there is the GMP failures in the plant. So the investigator was on the floor and observed employees touching the floor with their gloved hands and then touching product, right? And if FDA sees that, you're done, right? That's one time. That's all that has to take. And to your point, these things need to be constantly reiterated, constantly enforced. And because in plants, right, it's a tough work environment. And a lot of times you have very high turnover. So you have brand new people coming in. And sometimes you have people who are training those new people who have only been there a little bit of time themselves. And so they're kind of just passing along this knowledge that maybe somebody who was there a little bit and now they're gone kind of gets passed along. And then these legacies of information, which may be completely wrong, get passed on. There's this common belief in plants, and you see this time and time again. If you guys see this, put this in the comments if you see this too, is how many employees in the plants believe that box of gloves that they put on, that those gloves are sterile, and that as soon as they put those gloves on, man, they are bulletproof. They can do anything they want after that point in time. As long as I've got gloves on, I can do whatever I want, right? And you're just like, oh, no, it doesn't work that way. And then what's interesting, as you're going through these investigations, Austin, back to my prior example, right? You have an issue in the plant, you're trying to figure out what's going on, and you observe, and then you talk with management to get their side of things too. And what type of reasons are you seeing out there for management when you talk with them of, well, why is your team not following the rules? Why are they not speaking up?
Yeah. So actually, this is something I think would be great to kind of pose to the audience as well. Like in the comments, like I always love to get feedback and hear people's thoughts. Why do you think people don't speak up whenever they see an issue? Whether it's, going back to the GMP, when I see a coworker turn around and grab something off the floor and then go back to the line and I don't say anything, what could be a good reason for that happening? Or if I see an issue with a machine and there's a question about, sanitation, maybe, what would keep me from speaking up about that? So yeah, I would love to, if some of y'all have some thoughts or ideas, please plug it into the chat, because it's great to get some different opinions out there. But one of the biggest negative connotations that I hear a lot is that people assume that they're just lazy, right? Yeah. They assume that frontline workers are lazy, or that they're apathetic, and just simply don't care.
Yeah.
We get into, there's a lack of knowledge, which I think is one of the more true and applicable reasons. Yeah. Because without the proper knowledge, it's hard to speak up, because I don't even know if what I'm speaking up about is accurate, right? And
exactly. Yeah, Claire had a really good comment here. So personally, I'm very non-confrontational, so speaking up can be hard for me. Oh, absolutely, right? Me too, Claire, 100%. That's not easy. And the other piece of this too, right, is a lot of times production facilities are in rural locations out in the middle of nowhere. So like, if you're Cara in Wisconsin, you have a cheese plant that's out in the middle of nowhere. It has a workforce of 200 people making cheddar cheese or something like this. And these people all know each other outside of work. They went to high school together. They went to college together. This guy's married to this guy's wife, who's divorced from this guy, and they have joint custody. There's all these other interrelationships behind the scenes. Or it could be that the person who did that violation of a GMP in that particular example is just a mean bastard, right? And nobody wants to confront him because it's just going to end up in a fight. And so it's just, it's not worth the risk, right? So it all comes back to a lot of times people, right? And how these things interact and how these things relate. And from my viewpoint too, if management was to come back to me, Austin, and I would say, hey, listen, I'm observing some issues here on the floor relative to enforcement of GMPs or things like this. What's your thought on this? And if those managers come back to me and say, well, yeah, we just have a crappy workforce. We have crappy leadership, right?
Yeah.
You just can't do that, right? So now I've got a bigger problem.
Yeah. And not to throw HR under the bus, but I'm going to throw HR under the bus for a second. Back when we were doing a lot of work and research around anti-harassment, as we were doing a lot of kind of qualitative research around HR teams and trying to figure out like, why do they feel that this is a issue within their plant or within, their office place, and the amount of opinions that came out that just held no water was really wild. And I mean, in some of the places it was just very obvious that HR had just basically written them off, and they were like, I don't know, they're a bunch of animals and we don't know how to fix it. And I was like, that is a horrible place, because the employees will pick up on that. That you're setting the tone for that culture, even though they're not openly saying that. But that's, at that point I was like, you really need to find somewhere else to work. If like if this is how you feel about your employees, like that's, you gotta be able to support them.
Yeah, I just had this vision in my head, Austin. Imagine if I'm doing a GMP presentation and I'm the quality manager in the plant. And I get together everybody in the plant and they're all sitting in the conference room. And I get up there and say, okay, you idiots, I'm going to tell you this again for the 5th time. Evidently, you're so dumb that you can't figure this out. So we've all got to do this again. And we're going to keep doing this until you figure this out. Yay. Right?
Right. I mean, and that sets the tone. And there's so many subtle subtext elements within there. It's like, I'm saying that you're not competent enough to do this, like that I can do it better than you, which the lack of leadership humility on that is horrible. So yeah, and unfortunately what we see a lot is that frontline leadership are people that were really good at their job and then got promoted into a leadership position and then have zero leadership training. Right. And so we're hoping that they will create this culture within their team, but they really have no background or education on how to lead teams.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, because let's see if I can do this right. So my book is sitting back there, and that was the main thing that I wrote about in my book, was my experience of going from an individual contributor to a manager, because you don't get any training, right? Your boss comes up one day and says, congratulations, you're doing an awesome job. You're now the supervisor of this team of all your friends and people that you used to work with. Right? Right. And everybody's like, oh, wow, aren't you Mr. Fancy Pants now? And it's really hard. And they don't say, okay, well, the first thing we're going to do is send you to management training, right? If you're in a company that does that, you're very fortunate. It's trial by fire. And they throw you to the wolves. They give you a laptop. They put you in front of a desk and they say, here you go. And off you go. And unfortunately, to your point, Austin, a lot of times, if you were really good at what you did, now you just think it's more of that. Right. So it's like, okay, if I was really good at this, all I need to do is make everybody else be really good at this too. And then I'll be a successful leader. Right. No. And a lot of times too, you go back to what's comfortable. So if I'm a really good microbiologist, I'm going to want to gravitate to where I'm comfortable, right? And do those type of activities and go back to my comfort zone. I don't want to focus more on the people side, because that's the ironic thing of becoming a leader in an organization, is the farther you go up, the less actual work you do, right? You're not on the line making the product. You're not mixing the cheese. You're not cleaning the equipment and these type of things. You're helping to motivate and lead the people who do that actual work. And making that transition is really, really hard.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, this is something that we continue to see. And I think that's where, the GMP training really comes into play, because that's the opportunity to develop that competence within the front line, where it's like, hey, because I threw this question out on LinkedIn last week, and it didn't get much feedback on it, and so I'll throw this one out to the crowd as well, which is, what around GMP training, how could it be better, right? And because this is something, like you said, Bryan, this is a consistent issue when the FDA comes out. And so how can we improve that baseline training around either HACCP or GMPs, so that we know that we have a knowledgeable, because that's one of the first restrictions we want to remove, is that, like, do I even know how to identify a risk properly? That's rule number one. And it seems like a lot of times people don't feel confident in that they know how to identify the risk. Well, and if I don't feel confident I can identify it, don't want to put myself out there on a limb and speak up and say something if I'm not totally sure at what it is that I'm looking at, or that it actually is an issue.
Yeah. Well, and to your point then, and that's a really good one. So, for example, let's say we do a good job of training the employees, and we say, hey, listen, if you see a GMP violation, you need to let your supervisor know that you saw that. We don't expect you, to Claire's point, we don't expect you to go up and talk to somebody yourself, right? That's not your job. Get a hold of your supervisor, let them know that you saw something. So let's say that happens, and then I come to you as the supervisor and say, hey, Austin, I just saw Bill over there pick some product off the floor. And then you tell me, whatever, mind your own business and get back to work. Right? Done. Right? I, as an employee, I'm never going to say anything again, because the supervisor has given me clear direction on what he expects of me. And that's where the rubber hits the road. You're my supervisor. You control my life. You decide my shifts. You decide if I get a raise. You decide what lines I'm going to work on. You can make my life pleasant, or you can make my life really awful if you choose to. And making sure that you're happy as an employee under your supervision is primary. And I figured that out pretty quick. And we've talked about this before, right? If I'm an operator and I hear a machine that's making a strange noise, and I go to the supervisor and say, hey, this is kind of goofy, and the supervisor says, keep running, I may ask once or twice, and after that, I'm done. And now we have a hidden flaw in the system that we're aware of that no one's doing anything about.
Yeah. And that's why, when we created this particular course around, developing a speak up culture, I realized whenever I started talking to a lot of people about it, they were like, oh, it's a training program that goes out to the frontline employees. And I was like, no, that's who we want speaking up. But the education is not for this to change the culture. That comes from the leadership team, or from the frontline leadership team. So we got to address how they are responding directly to their team, because that's what's going to really set the tone. Like you said, someone comes to the shift supervisor and brings up an issue, and they just kind of write it off and are dismissive. Well, then that sets the tone for the culture from there on out. And so that's the element that we're looking to shift when we talk about this concept.
Yeah, and Claire got me thinking about this as well, Austin. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts around this as well. Have we essentially been trained for this through our whole lives? Think back when you're in elementary school and you're sitting there with a classroom full of your peers, your students, and you have a teacher in the front, and you kind of, there's the kids that sit in the front. Oh, I've got the end, right? You got the other kids in the back, they're kind of like, trying to take a nap or things like this, right? You got the other guys in the middle. I was kind of sitting there in the middle, right? And we're kind of following directions around that line. But even then in that classroom, right, if the teacher's not looking, it's like, ooh, time to throw that piece of paper at that, friend of yours or whatever. right? What can I get away with, right? So you got to wonder how much of this behavior has been kind of drilled into us from a young age, and we're not even aware of it.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's 100% drilled in from from a sociological standpoint, right? Or, so when we look at like the sociology or the anthropology, that's where it gets really fascinating, because everything that I've done, research wise and developing, training programs and curriculum and stories for different, training films has all, when I talk about this concept of speaking up, I'm taking a very Western approach to this, right? That's my worldview. That's what I know. That's what I understand. So that where I'm very interested in where this concept can go is that as we get into different regional cultures, right? So as we move into the Middle East, into the Far East, there's definitely big shifts in like the actual regional culture that informs people of how and when they should be speaking up, and do you speak up to authority figures. So as you start to look at a more complex kind of hierarchy within the social system, how do we start to overcome that? And that's a question that I still don't have an answer to, right? So if I'm working within a factory, like I said, in Japan, there's the Japanese approach to speaking up is radically different than it is in America. And so like, how do we create the culture within the company that might be somewhat contrary to what the social culture is? Mm-hmm. I don't have an answer for that one. That's why I keep throwing that out there to people, hoping that someone can kind of point me in the right direction. Because I do realize that I have a very Western view, because that's the only view I, have. That's what I grew up with. Yeah. But trying to figure out how to expand this concept into different regions and environments that I'm not completely familiar with.
Yeah. Well, and even cultures that are very close to the culture here in the US. So in my past, I worked for a company. I had production plants in Mexico, and, very, very close culture, but there were subtle differences. So for example, there's a very strong rule in the Mexican workforce that the boss is the boss. Patron, right? You do what they say. And if I go in, even as the vice president, going into a production facility and talking with someone and saying, hey, you need to do this, they're going to do anything until their boss says, yeah, we're going to do that. It doesn't matter. They're the boss, right? And if you don't understand that, you're going to beat your head against the wall, because you're not going to understand why people aren't doing what you want to do. It's because you're not respecting that cultural belief within that system. You need to understand those.
Right. Yeah. So that, so that's a whole other thing. And what's interesting is that hopefully we'll be rolling this program out that we created to some plants in Mexico, and then down in South America. So that'll be some really interesting data that we get back from those two kind of pilots in those two countries. So we're kind of going through the translation process right now and make sure that we have the translations accurate. But yeah, that'll be a great data set, because we are collecting a good amount of data as part of these programs.
That reminds me. Do you remember that old story of, do you remember the Chevy Nova?
Oh, yeah.
Car? So sales in Mexico were abhorrent. So Chevrolet had launched this car in Mexico, and the sales were terrible, and they couldn't understand why. Do you know why? Nova in Mexico means no go.
Oh, no. Oh, man.
Major blunder on their part. And so it's like, why would I buy this car? Right? You're advertising that it's a piece of crap.
The Chevy no-go.
So really, yeah. So as we kind of talking about this, right? So just saying that, hey, see something, you need to say something about it. That's never enough. We need that reinforcement. And the leaders need to develop those skills to be able to do that, right? We just can't assume that they have them, because we've shown time and time again that they don't. They don't have those skills.
Right.
And the frontline readers aren't getting those training. So you had mentioned here a little bit ago relative to these particular obstacles that we're overcoming. So your upcoming course. So you've been talking a little bit this. So I'm excited to learn more about this. So what's going on with your upcoming course?
So man, a lot. Well, so before we get into that,
Yeah.
I wanted to touch upon like some of the specific reasons that we find, because I wanted to kind of like reveal actually what's in the course, so that you know, I'm gonna just give away some of this information. But you know, when we talk about the reasons that people don't speak up, you know, one of the biggest things is this fear. It's a fear, right? And it's these fears around, you know, you mentioned part of it, which is that, like, you know, the social dynamics of I got promoted and I'm now managing my friends, but also the, you know, these fears of the repercussion, right? That what if I lose this job, right? Because if I say something and I run the risk of losing this job, then how do I, you know, what am I going to do? I live in a town where it's this or Walmart,
Nothing.
right?
Yeah.
Those are my options. So much of what that the course is focusing on is helping to overcome that fear of speaking up, and then overcoming the fear of I don't know how to properly identify a risk. And so, excuse me. So so within the course, what I did was I took and kind of brought 3 different fields of research together that have been kind of I've utilized in different training programs over the years, and they kind of all congealed into this. And so it's research in bystander intervention. And so there's tons of really great research in bystander intervention, which goes back to the 1950s. And actually, Frank Giannis talks about this in one of his books. You know, the research all kind of started with there's a popular case, the Kitty Genovese murder case that was back in the 50s. And basically there was a woman who was murdered, I think in Brooklyn, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the street.
Wow.
And she's screaming for help, and supposedly no one came to assist this woman in distress. And so the reporter started doing more research into like, well, like, it's horrible that this crime happened out in the open like this. That was the bigger focus, that like, how could this happen? This horrible crime just right in the middle of the street. But the reporter was like, how is it that nobody said anything? You know, that to me is the more curious question here. And that spun off years and years of research around why are people fearful of speaking up? And so, you know, if I could boil down all of the research around bystander intervention, what it really comes down to is addressing these 2 core questions. So like, whenever you or I or anybody sees something that might give us pause, and we're questioning, should something be said, then the 2 questions we're asking ourselves is, should somebody intervene here? And the second question is, am I that person to intervene? Those are the 2 questions that, like, on a subconscious level, we're asking ourselves. And so I have to be able to get the affirmative on the first one. Should someone say something? And it's like, yeah, definitely, this seems wrong. And then, am I the person to do that? And so much of what we face when we're trying to build this culture of speaking up is helping the employees overcome those 2 key questions. And then the other field of research that comes into it, so you've got bystander intervention. The other field is self-determination theory, which we've done a talk on before, which is the theory of motivation, and really gets into these, what are known as like psychological needs that we all have. So just like we have a physiological need for air, water, food, shelter, we have 3 core psychological needs to make us, well-rounded human beings. And that's a need for autonomy, a a need for relatedness, and a need for competence.
Yeah.
And so when we look at that, autonomy is pretty obvious, right? That I have volition, that I am free to make my own choices in the world, and that I have free will. So that's the first one, that sense of relatedness, and that, which is that the social kind of construct of, or the social, I'm connected to my team, the peers that I work with, or my leader, the company's mission, doing a lot of interviews around food safety culture. It's really fascinating to find out how people relate to the company's mission. And that really is a good kind of pulse of someone's of the company's food safety culture, is, finding out how connected to the mission of the company are the employees.
Yeah.
And that third psychological need is the need for competence, to feel that I am good at what I do, that I'm competent and capable. And so that's the other field of research that kind of comes into this, creating a speak up culture. And then the final one is psychological safety. So how do we leverage or how do we build a culture that is psychologically safe? And psychological safety is simply just being able to work in an environment where I feel that I'm able to contribute and speak up and bring contributions without fear of repercussions.
Yeah.
And so this is a topic that I've been seeing pick up more and more speed. And I always recommend the book because it basically lays everything out. So a woman named Amy Edmondson from Harvard, her entire career has been built around really researching psychological safety. And her book, The Fearless Organization, I think is amazing. Like, I have about 8 books that I keep on a small bookshelf in my desk that are my reference material books. And that's one of them because I'm constantly going back and pulling quotes and research from her book. So those are the 3 things that we're really looking to, like, how do we help frontline leaders tap into all this stuff, right? How do they create a sense of autonomy within their team? How does the leader help create that relatedness? And then how do they help create that autonomy? And then at the same time, develop a culture in which people feel psychologically safe, right? They feel safe and empowered to bring this to their attention. And so that's what so much of the curriculum is really based on within this course that we designed. And getting away from just knowledge-based training. Like, we're really trying to move into this skills-based training where there's 2 components to it, where there's the video training, which is like, here's the data dump, here's the information that you as a manager need to know about why people don't speak up, because they might be carrying these erroneous ideas of, like, oh, they're just lazy, or they don't have a high enough IQ, or whatever the negative connotation is that they have associated with why people don't speak up. We want to start to overcome that first and be like, well, here's the actual reasons why people don't speak up. But then there's also the element of, once they go through that training, that 20-minute training, then developing the skill. So we've created a 8-week email course, basically, that sends an email to that manager twice a week with, here are activities you can do with your team to start to build that culture. Because that's what most of those frontline leaders, they don't know how to translate this new knowledge into a new skill or a new behavior. So we got to help them kind of cross that bridge and translate. Now that you have the knowledge, here's how you can put it into play and start to do this. And so, and to develop a skill, we need practice, right? If I just watched a 30-minute training film on how to play guitar and then never picked up the guitar, how do you expect me to develop that skill? When we're talking about skills, it literally takes practice, and that means doing the thing back out in the real world. So that's what we've really tried to do, is make it as easy as possible for that frontline leader to just, like, all right, it's week 3. Here's the activity that you can include within your weekly check-in meeting or your
Ooh,
daily check-in meeting. So it's within, trying to keep it within the flow of work, right? Because all
yeah.
of this is around building a relationship with the team directly.
Gotcha. So let me see if this example works in that particular context then. So let's say, for example, that you're doing these type of trainings then, and as part of that training, I would then do some role playing with the team and say, okay, guys, we're going to work through this and we'll see how you should react on this. Okay. So Bob, I want you to be the employee, and then Sally, you're going to be another employee. And Bob, I want you to pick some product off the ground and throw it back on the line. And Sally, how are you going to react to that type thing? And then, because that then becomes a safe environment, right? Nobody's judged. It didn't really happen, and people can have fun with it, and these type of things, and it helps reinforce that behavior, and it gets people engaged as opposed to just sitting and listening to somebody talk.
Yeah, well, and it also, I mean, it serves as kind of, we built in enough flexibility within the curriculum where it's like, this week you want to cover some elements around GMPs, then do that, include that in your meeting. So that you can continually be talking about this, because GMP has to, all your kind of what I consider baseline cost of entry training programs have to consistently be reinforced. And so going back to that and saying, here's how we hope you address this, where do you see potential risks that maybe we're missing? So part of that element of that leadership is displaying the humility that I don't have all the answers, because that's another restriction, right? What if my boss is a know-it-all, why would I take something to the know-it-all, right? Because I'm pretty sure I know what kind of response I'm going to get, which is that
it gets back to my earlier response, right? Is so we're social animals, and if I figure out after one or two tries what the response from my supervisor is going to be, I already know. Why waste my time? It's much more efficient just to move on, because I know the supervisor is going to say, just keep going, right? There's no point. I had a question here. How much of this is generational, right? So we constantly hear on LinkedIn these other things. Oh, here's what Gen Xers do, and here's what the boomers do, and these type of things. And you'll see criticisms online because, let's say, back to your prior example of something bad is happening, right? Somebody's being robbed in the middle of the street. And I think millennials, they get a bad rap for this because I don't think that's necessarily true. But the general feeling in society is if something's happening and a millennial sees it, this is what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They get out their camera and they start videotaping it. Right? They don't help. They don't intervene. And what type of elements are associated with that relative to generational? Are you seeing anything relative to that?
Not particularly, but that's a great observation, because that is something that's been a point of discussion within, the bystander intervention forums. Because a lot of times when we went specifically on that topic of millennials recording horrible stuff, but not particularly intervening, they view that as a form of intervention, that, well, I'm documenting it to build the case as to, this horrible thing. But I mean, there's questions that unfortunately I don't have answers to. I mean, I remember, not to bring up too terribly emotional deal, but watching the George Floyd video, and I was just appalled that I was like, I can't believe nobody's doing anything. There's lots of, and so I think there's generational stuff, like you said, there's regional stuff that's addressed, down to religious stuff that has to be addressed. I mean, that's a big element that we don't really talk about, because it's almost taboo, but it's a huge element that plays into our beliefs and our values and how we respond to things. So there's just so many of these different moving parts. What's beautiful about this theory of motivation that I talked about, this self-determination theory, is that it's a universal theory. It's been tested and tested and tested over the past 30, 40 years in pretty much every environment you could think of. And regardless of religion or socioeconomic status, or, where you fall within the hierarchy, or what region you're from, these three psychological needs apply no matter what. it's a global human issue. Autonomy, relatedness, competence. Doesn't matter where you're from. So that works as this kind of like beautiful Rosetta Stone whenever we're designing any kind of training program, whether it's around food safety culture or speaking up or retail food safety. It doesn't matter. That for me is my foundation for everything whenever I'm designing, because I'm trying to figure out, how do I create a learning environment that fosters autonomy in the learner and helps them relate better to their team, while also developing the competence that's necessary to execute this task back on the job.
Interesting. So I'm curious to get your take on this. And so this example just kind of popped in my mind of kind of the intervention side of things. We've all seen the video online of this incident that occurred on a subway train in New York City, where there was a gentleman, right? And we don't have the whole context, and the court case is going on. And this gets back to the video, right? All we're seeing is a little snippet. We don't have the entire story, and that can really influence how you view things. But there was this guy on the train, and he was doing some crazy stuff, and a bystander intervened and put him in a headlock type situation, and the guy died, right? And so now the person who intervened is being prosecuted by the city of New York. And so everybody in New York City, and now everybody in the country, and probably large chunks of the world, have seen this, right? And that's teaching a lesson in ways, right? So regardless of the outcome and the context of this particular situation, what's been taught in this particular example is intervening has risk, right? Even if you think you're doing the right thing, you're not necessarily in a safe spot relative to you, right? You could end up being the one going to jail.
When I think Claire brought up a good point, which she was talking about being non-confrontational. So speaking up would be very hard for her. And this is something that we address in the program, is that everybody has a certain comfort level for their level of intervention, right? There's some people who are completely fine walking up to somebody and saying, well, here's a problem, or going directly to the boss and saying like, hey, I see this issue immediately. Some people might be more comfortable with a suggestion box, right? Yeah. So that's the other thing that we look at, is creating different channels of speaking up, because one channel is not a panacea, right? Like, people are going to have different levels of comfort in how they intervene. So we want to make sure that we create those different channels. And so that's one of the things that we look at as well, because I think the majority of people will start out not very comfortable speaking up. So we want to make it a low risk environment for them to bring issues up to management.
Gotcha. So I did want to come back to your course a little bit and kind of pick your brain a little bit on how you've got this thing organized, because this sounds really cool. So kind of what's the first thing in the course that people who sign up for this are going through?
So what we did, I forgot to talk about the assessment tool. I'm really proud of the assessment tool that we built. It's a 10-question assessment built upon research that comes from the different fields of study that I talked about. So what we're really looking to measure is an employee's sense of autonomy, competence, relatedness, as well as their sense of psychological safety within the team. So there's a 10-question survey. It's an anonymous survey that we would send out to all of the employees that report to the manager who's going to be going through this course. So the manager's been enrolled in the course. First thing is we send this link out to the manager and say, hey, get this to your employees either via email, or if your employees don't have email, you can do it on an iPad or an iPhone or whatever. And it's 10 questions, so it takes about 2 minutes to go through. And then we gather all of those responses. So maybe say that particular leader has 20 people that report to them. Well, now we generated those responses, and it gives us a speak up score, basically. And that speak up score is built up of the questionnaire that's focused around both the self-determination and as well as the psychological safety. Once we've gathered that information, we have a report that we send back to the manager. And then if the manager's supervisor or the next rung of leadership wants to see those results, we send that to them in a kind of a spreadsheet. And then that manager goes through the online video training, which is basically me just talking to camera and saying, here's what we know about why people don't speak up. Now they've got that knowledge side of it. They've got the new information, and then they're enrolled in this 8-week email campaign where they receive 2 emails per week with like, hey, this week, so on Monday it's try this. And then on Friday, it's like, how did it go? So kind of a check-in. And so we're still kind of collecting data along that way because there's still kind of surveys built in, but we wanted to make it so that the manager has, no more than a 10 to 20 minute time commitment per week, because that's always the ask with learning and design is how can we make this as short as possible. So, and then once they go through the 8 weeks of the email series, they've gone through, they've done these different activities with their team. They help them identify risks. They've helped kind of brainstorm different risks that might be appearing. And so it starts to create that relatedness amongst the team while also building the competence of the team, because now the team is like, okay, now we've had more practice seeing what this is. And through this, the leader is developing that autonomy because they're openly asking the team, like, what do you think? Let's creating a dialogue around this as opposed to just, I am the leader delivering information to you. Now go forth and do good. And then once they go through the 8 weeks, then there's a post assessment. The same 10 questions go out to all of the employees that report to that leader. We get those results back. We look at, did we see improvement? And then I've broken up the assessment to kind of into smaller, I'm drawing a blank on the word, but subdivided data. So there's like the overall speak up score, but then I can also look at, what's the autonomy score or what's the psychological safety score, because maybe the score went up, but it's like, well, this manager did a really great job of boosting psychological safety, but there was like no improvement around the concept of relatedness within the team. So
gotcha.
How can we continue and potentially put together like a personalized development plan for that manager?
Okay, that's good.
Work on these specific topics that they might be missing.
Okay, so then, yeah, if you had an overall score and you went up in one area and down in another area and it balances out, you may not see that. So you get to look at the subcomponents as well. And what I like about this as well, too, Austin, is that if you want to improve something, you got to measure it, right? And a lot of times when you're looking at measuring elements of behavior and psychology and stuff like that, it's very hard to measure. And I like the fact, too, that it's short. So in this particular example, then in a production facility, if I'm a manager and I have, let's say 3 different supervisors who work for me, and they're each going to go through this program, they would each have their own score, and then that would roll up into my score. Okay, nice.
Yeah, because we want to be able to see, what the improvement or the lack of improvement is. And this is something that we see a lot within the learning design world, is that I have clients who want to see previous clients' results, but usually previous clients are reluctant to release to actually get the data, right? To track it down. I can build the assessment tools and things like that, but if they're not used, then I'm kind of stuck. I'm dead in the water. So that was one of the things that I really wanted to make is a key component of this training, is that like we have to collect the information because we want to actually see if this is improving the overall speak up culture within the organization. Because for me, this is one component of food safety culture. If we look at food safety culture as this massive umbrella, the concept of speak up culture is just one component underneath that.
No, and that's a really good point, Austin, in that I think a lot of times, and we've talked about this before, the term food safety culture is too abstract. Right? What does that mean, right? How do I implement something like that? It's too amorphous, and different people are going to interpret it different ways. So being able to then bring that down to this level and have actionable, measurable steps, I think is brilliant. Also, I like what you're talking about this as well, is if I'm a supervisor, generally, and this is always good practice in plants, is you have a pre-op team, like a pre-op team meeting, right? Say, okay, guys, here's the plan for today. We're going to be producing this product and we're going to be doing this. And oh, by the way, Sally's out today. She's sick. So Bill's going to be covering her area of the operation or things like this. This lesson can be incorporated into that meeting. It's like, okay, hey guys, here's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's all gather around and we'll go through this information. So it sounds like it's something that's really easy, because that's part of the problem in plants too, is getting everybody together. Like my example when we started the chat here is, if you have a plant of 200 people and getting everybody into the training room is hard. Mm-hmm. People got shit they got to do. And you have people who aren't there for that shift, and you have people who are on vacation, and all these type of things. If you do it during the day and the sanitation is at night, you wake them up and do it, drag them all in? Probably not. And even in those type of situations, if you try and tack those type of meetings onto the end of the sanitation shift that occurred that night before, those guys are tired, right? They're wet, they're sweaty, they just want to go home and go to sleep. They aren't going to be in a position to absorb new information.
Right. And that's why we really want to break it down into these like simple, tangible things. It's like talking about losing weight, right? Like if I come in and I have 100 pounds I need to lose, and someone starts training me for a marathon, like I'm not gonna win, right there. I'm not gonna make it through. It's too big of an ask. It's like, well, so a lot of times it might be like, well, park your car an extra 50 feet back in the parking lot when you go to the grocery store, so you walk an extra 50 feet. Like, baby steps, little things that are achievable, easy wins to build up that skill set or that new behavior. And so that's what we're really focusing on, because all of this comes back to the concept of shifting behaviors. In food safety culture, we talk about values, beliefs, and behaviors. For me, values and beliefs are really complicated to assess and measure and train on, but like behaviors, like that's a very tangible, measurable. It's measurable, it's observable, I can track it. Like that's where we can get some actual data and then see, is it affecting a certain KPI that we might be aiming for? Yeah. And then the last thing with the course is we priced it in a way to, I think I've realized over the years that there's, whenever I talk to people about Sage Media, there's, they see some of the previous work that we do and they go, oh, we can't afford to work with you. We've seen what you do. And historically, we've worked mainly with larger Fortune 500 companies. So we wanted to create something that was cost effective, that was affordable for anybody. So basically, for this program, it's $249 per manager, and that includes the assessment, the training, the 8 weeks of the email, and then the post assessment, and then the final, the final reports. So we wanted to make this kind of almost a stupid, easy decision for people to at least get a few other managers through this, so that we can start to move the needle a little bit on this topic.
Nice. I like this. And so two things come to mind is one of the things that I've often had in quality and system design and things like this is creating something that is simple and elegant is really hard to do. Simple is hard. And so what it sounds like you've put together here is a program that is simple and gets you to your objectives in an easy manner. And that's when people follow through. So that's really good. So as we're kind of closing out the chat here and bringing this back up to the 30,000 foot level, where can people find more out about this, Austin?
They can definitely email me. They got my email right there. LinkedIn. I've been posting some different videos on LinkedIn with some information around just developing a speak up culture, ways to do it, some of the obstacles that we're overcoming. So I'm trying to share as much information about this as I possibly can. And then I don't have the direct link to the course. I should actually pull that up real quick. I didn't think about that before I jumped on the call. But yeah, there's a direct link, and I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Well, while you're pulling that up, I'll make another observation here, give you a little time. Scott Adams is a person I follow from the Dilbert cartoons, and he does a lot of good work around psychology and persuasion and things of this nature. And one of the sayings he has popped into my head when you were talking about this. And one of the things that he says a lot of times, systems work better than goals. So there are situations where specific goals are necessary, but the example he uses is what you were talking about, is like exercise and things like this. So if you have a system for exercising, it's like, okay, every day I'm going to do exercise. And it could be as simple as, okay, I'm going to walk to the mailbox. that's a feeling of accomplishment that you have done something. But if you just have a goal that says I'm going to lose 20 pounds and you're not making progress, and oh, you cheated over the weekend, and you weigh yourself, you're going to get discouraged really quickly. So if you have an overall system that says I'm going to exercise, and every time that you do that, you're like, yes, I did that, right? You're going to motivate yourself much more.
Definitely. So yeah, so I just found the link, and so we have a second company that's actually called Sage Academy. And so Sage Media is where we design all of our custom training products. Sage Academy is where these kind of pre-made programs are hosted. This is basically like our learning management system. So you'll see in the link that it's sage.academy. Same company, just a separate website for our off-the-shelf courses.
Awesome. I'm not seeing it in the chat yet. Have you?
Oh, sorry. I think maybe I sent it in a private chat.
Yeah. Yep. It went private.
Oh.
Let's see. Tell you what. I can go over to the private, and I can grab it.
Yeah. For some reason, it's giving me issues with connecting to the comment section.
Yeah. Maybe that's. Yeah. There we go. There it is.
And then, yeah, I mean, any questions that people have, I mean, this is kind of a passion topic for me, so I love chatting about it. So yeah, feel free to send me a message if you have any questions about your particular culture, issues that you might be faced with. It's just it's a topic that fascinates me.
Yeah, this is exciting. This is a really cool program, and I'm really glad that we're able to bring it to everybody here today. So with that, we're going to close out the chat here for today. And again, thank you everybody for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. And if you can't tell, this was a really important chat here today. This is good information, and this is something that we've all been struggling with through our careers, is trying to get this type of behavior installed in our plants. And if you're successful at this, man, you're going to do great. So thanks, Austin, for bringing this to us here today. I'm really excited about this program.
Awesome. Thank you.
Then thank you, everybody, for attending today and investing your time to learn about this. And as usual, we'll close our chat here for today. We'll be back here next Friday at the same time. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, for the next food safety chat, where we'll bring on another expert to talk about another topic. And next week's going to be a good one again. So we'll see everybody here next week. In the meantime, have a fantastic weekend. Enjoy yourself. Thanks again, Austin, for being here. And we'll see everybody next week. Have a good one.
Have a good weekend.